Okay, so thank you very much to Matt for inviting me to talk at the meetup. Friday is the company that I was working at when I did the work that we're talking about in this presentation. We hosted the meetup in January. I'm a big fan of it. Really think it's a really important part of the community and kind of engaging people, allow us to talk about our work, sort of share experiences and that sort of thing. And I'd also like to thank Justy and in particular Chris Adele for coming and letting me in and do some live testing in production this morning to check that things like the VGA worked and this stuff would not fall off the wall and that sort of. So thank you very much to Chris. Now, originally, this talk and the kind of as advertised title of this talk was sharpening the axe, and it was all about how the kind of the effort that went into getting us into a position to do sort of automated, sort of rapid delivery was what enabled this project here to work. But as I was putting the talk together and sort of thinking about it, the theme I kept coming back to was something different. So I renamed it. So it's now called Beyond the Zone of Control. And the zone of control is something that comes from H. Williams Detmer. So I came across this through Gojko Adzik's writing. It's the idea of, it's a mental model that I found to be very useful for thinking about software and thinking about software development. It's the idea of kind of the zone of control is the stuff that you have control over, and you can pretty much say what's going to go on there, and you can pretty much sort of determine the outcome. And Chris Argyris, who again is somebody I find very useful in kind of understanding sort of organizational psychology and kind of how work works, he states that the desire to be in control, to control situations, is a very kind of human desire. It goes right back to sort of primeval thing of kind of like knowing you're not going to get killed and knowing you're going to you're going to survive. And the kind of thesis of this talk is that by kind of relaxing your sort of level of control and thinking more about where you can be, what you can do in your zone of influence, what you can do beyond the area that you have control of, and by the same token, accepting other people's influence in, and kind of allowing that kind of sort of the overlap, what sort of Tim Brown in design thinking calls sort of overlapping spaces, is a very helpful mental model, and is a way that sort of helps you kind of sort of achieve a better outcome, and kind of achieve sort of better results, and allows you to sort of think more systemically about the work, and to kind of and to avoid ending up with sort of local optima. So the way I'm going to talk about it is to tell the story of a project. So I'll put something about it up on the screen here. So this is a project that I did working at We Are Friday. So We Are Friday is a full-service digital agency. Misha from We Are Friday is sitting over here. They have some open roles. Misha will be very happy to talk to you about those open roles. The project was to deliver two things. One was to reskin an existing Drupal website with a new tier of branding that was going to sit on top of that legacy Drupal website, and to do it by a fixed date. It had to do it at a point where there's going to be a whole load of TV advertising and a whole load of eyeballs were going to be directed towards the site. The other thing it had to do was build a kind of microsite that would be sort of embedded in that site, and that was a mechanism for getting people to come and sign up to use Nuffield Health's gyms. So it's to kind of come along and say, I'll get a free voucher, come into the gym, and then the idea is that in the course of your day at the gym, you'd be converted into a member. And for that we built the whole end-to-end thing. So we had the site where you sign up, you get the voucher back through Passbook or SMS. There's fulfillment, so there was a site where when you went into the gym, you could say your voucher could be exchanged and all the rest of it. And then there were metrics to be able to tell you what the conversion rate was and all that sort of thing. And the sort of story of this project is told in this diagram over here. So first of all, can anyone in the audience tell me what this diagram is? What type of diagram this is? Somebody who's not from Skelton Thatcher. Anyone else? No. It is as Rob says, a cumulative flow diagram. Does anyone use cumulative flow diagrams in their work? Hands up. Anyone who uses them? I would urge you to have a look at them. They're a really kind of helpful way of telling you what the current state of a project is and historically how it's performing, and it critically it gives you an indication of what sort of the future state or the future direction of the project is going to be. So I'll put the one for this project up on the screen here, and I'll talk about it a bit more. So what you have in the cumulative flow diagram, you start on the left with the kind of the potential, the sort of the ideas, the things that the sort of features that could be turned into real live working stuff in production. And these come from this story map here. So we've sort of worked out the kind of the scope of the project and converted it into a bunch of features. They then this light yellow color here, this is stuff that's queued, so it's waiting to be worked on. Here's product development working on stuff, here's design working on stuff, here's user experience working on stuff. And after a little while, development kind of starts. We start working on some stuff. We don't actually deliver anything into production until here. So it's quite a long time. We don't actually get anything ready to pop into the queue for QA to look at until here. So there's quite a long period here where development don't actually show any throughput. They're not actually putting anything out. And this is a classic model. This is something that David Anderson talks about. You see on a lot of projects. It's called the S-curve. So this is where you start off with very low throughput. After a certain amount of time, you start getting into predictable throughput, and your throughput goes up, and then it peters off towards the end. And there are various reasons for that. The reason on this project was what this original title of this talk was, the sharpening of the axe. And I will go to the next picture. It was the creation of the kind of infrastructure and tooling to enable us to develop and deploy rapidly. And that was through development and operation working together. And the term DevOps, I think, is one of the kind of most abused terms in the sort of lexicon of software development. It's almost as abused as agile and refactoring. It kind of is bandied around with kind of multiple meanings that kind of either overlap or wildly diverge. I think of it a bit like the way people talk about GNU Linux. It's dev/ops for me, or dev-ops. It's a relationship, and it's to come back to the kind of the deeper thing, the zone of control, sphere of influence. It's allowing other people's skills to influence yours. It's thinking, I'm coming from a development perspective. I don't know as much about operations as somebody who's worked on keeping systems up and worked on the operational focus of things. I don't know as much as him, so I'm going to allow his influence to come over and sort of wash over me and help me kind of write code that is going to work in production and be operational. By the same token, the operations guy, who's this guy Grant here, is absolutely fantastic operations guy, who's tonight is speaking at the Ordnance Survey, which is why he's not here doing this talk with me. He doesn't know as much about, say, the business objectives of the work, or the sort of why we've developed things in a certain way. So getting dev and ops to work together was absolutely critical, and it worked really well on this project. So at the beginning of the project, Friday's sort of default approach to provisioning and deployment was to use Puppet. So they had quite a big investment in Puppet and a way of doing things in Puppet. And when I started this project, I was sort of doing architecture diagrams and saying, yeah, so the Puppet agent's going to be here and we're going to do this. And Grant said to me, no, I don't think we're going to, actually. I think we're going to use Ansible for this. And it's like, oh, right, okay. Why is that then? He goes, well, it's going to be a lot simpler. And I said, okay then. So we had a sort of bit of conversation about this. He goes, trust me on this. It's going to be a lot simpler. It's going to work really well. And I said, okay, but the thing is, I need to have these. I need to have some machines up in AWS tomorrow, and I need to be able to start testing stuff. So lo and behold, the next day he said, here's the Ansible playbook that will create your machines for you, and it's all ready to go, and they're spun up. I was like, wow, that's fantastic. So from that came, and this is the sharpening of the axe where we were working here, was a fantastic kind of back and forth between dev and ops, where Grant would kind of write a playbook, give it to us in development. We come back and go, I don't know about that role. Maybe we should split that into two roles, or I'm not really sure. I think our intent here is slightly different from what what you've understood it here, so we'll change that. But it was a truly kind of it was a true kind of engagement. It meant that we were really understanding where Grant was coming in terms of, like, say for example, his role for setting up the base CentOS image would do all kinds of things to do with grub and to do with IP tables, which were kind of, me, it was like kind of, this is the lower tiers of the stack. I very rarely go down here. I don't have the sort of smarts, or kind of get the sort of engineering bends if I go down too far. But I kind of but at least I knew that it was important. I knew it had to be there. And I could focus more on on the things that are sort of more sort of higher up. But it meant that we built, through this relationship, we built something that allowed us to, and this is fantastic. This wasn't intentional, but I thought, isn't it great having pictures of people making food in restaurants at Just Eat? So it meant that we effectively got to here a continuous flow of work through development. So we were able to. This is the sort of lean Kanban thing of working on small batch sizes, limiting work in progress. The idea being that you get to a point where you're getting feedback, you're getting stuff that's not yet deployed, which we'll come to in a minute, but you've got stuff that is ready for deployment. QA have looked at it, and you're sort of predictable in your throughput. You can say, yeah, well, we delivered 3 features last week, so we're probably going to deliver 3 features next week. And this is kind of, the work is coming out like this, and it's kind of predictable. I'm going to just talk a little bit more about the Ansible side of things, what we put in place on top of Ansible to enable this. So this is a very big image, hasn't been optimized yet. What we built for Nuffield Health was going to sit in on-prem. So it's essentially, it was a data center that they managed. I'd come from a purely AWS background, so for me this was like getting into the TARDIS and popping out back in the sort of early 90s. But it was, we knew it was going to be on-prem, and those environments were going to have to be, a business case was going to have to be made for those environments to be provisioned. They were going to have to be created, and eventually we'd get the keys to them. So we wanted to be in a position where we knew that when they did arrive, we could deploy to them straight away. We could put our software on them and deploy to them straight away. So we wanted to be ready for that. So the way we approached that was we used Vagrant in development, and so we could spin up boxes and throw them away sort of on a very quick cycle. And we used AWS to create our sort of pre-production environments. And then we put this layer on top of Ansible, which is a good old bash script. We had 2 bash scripts. We had one called provision and one called deploy. And what they did is they did all the kind of gnarly stuff of, oh, it's Vagrant. Okay, so you need to go off and use this. You'll be the Vagrant user when you do this. Oh, it's AWS. Well, you need to have these environment variables exported, and then you can run your playbook. Or it's oh, it's the on-prem. Oh, in that case, you need to use this particular key. And it was just, it's very low-fi, it's very kind of low-tech, but it means that you've then got a very simple interface for running the automation. And in the README for this project, you can just say, you want to deploy the project, it's deploy. It's deploy environment. It meant that our Jenkins jobs were very, very simple. There was very little stuff that had to go into the job builder scripts to actually run it. It would just be get the thing out of Git, and then it's deploy environment, or what have you. So this all went very well. And I said one other thing about Ansible, which I really like. So we became members of the Church of Ansible at this point. We really got into it. And I'll just give a quick. Oh, I don't have the picture here. I have it down here. We had props. So this is Grant and Alkesh, who also worked on the project. We all went to the Ansible London thing and came up with T-shirts, and we all loved it. Another thing I really found really sort of beneficial about working with Ansible, worked really well for me, was how quickly you got a response to any sort of upstream changes to playbooks. So here's one here. Part of this is a Node application. So this bit on the side here is a Node application, and we were using PM2 as the process manager for it. And I needed it to I needed to be able to say which version of PM2 I was using, which it didn't do out of the box. And the guys who were who'd produced this and maintained it, there was very little effort involved in sort of just, oh, it doesn't do what the playbook doesn't do what you need it to do. Fine, fork it, patch it, PR it, and you're done. And it was all very clear and transparent, and just worked very well. So that was really gratifying, really enjoyable aspect of working with Ansible. Now, I'm going to come to this part of the CFD here and talk about what happened here. So here we have all this stuff all sitting in a queue waiting to be deployed, but it doesn't actually get deployed. And there are two reasons for this. There's a kind of good reason and a bad reason. This is the good reason. So the good reason is, like Michel Roux in a fancy restaurant. The restaurant and the restaurant customers all want the food to arrive at the same point. They want everyone to get their food at the same time and be able to eat at the same time. Has anyone had the experience of being in a restaurant where everyone else has been served, but your food comes like just as the other plates are being cleared away? So that's a case where batching and not delivering continuously is actually what you want to happen. You want this all stuff to be ready and say, okay, we're ready, go. And in the sort of analog of that on this project was that all the marketing money that was being spent on the rebranding, on saying here's the TV adverts and they're going to point to the new website, was all going to be activated on the 29th of December. So on the morning of the 29th of December, a whole load of sort of Twitter sponsored tweets were unleashed. Adverts went on first in Breaking Coronation Street and all that sort of thing, and we flipped over from being kind of dark launch to being available. So that's a good thing, and I think that's an important thing to remember when thinking about sort of continuous delivery. And again, it comes back to this zone of control, sphere of influence thing. You may completely have it, and you may have the control to be able to say, actually, I can deliver whenever I want, I can deploy whenever I want. But it may actually be that in doing that, you're going to upset some things that are beyond your control, and you you may have some influence over. You may be able to say, well, it would actually work better if we did this at this cadence, or it would be better if this didn't happen on this day. But you are really into a sort of bigger world than yours, and where that batching, that sort of modulating of when stuff gets released is a good thing. The flip side of this is the not so good thing, which is that all this time up here where we weren't delivering anything, where we were sharpening the axe and dev and ops were working together, and we were getting ourselves into a position where we were ready to deploy. All of this automation stuff that didn't exist in the on-prem site that we were deploying to. That was all done by hand, and again, it was something that we didn't have any influence over. I don't know if anyone remembers this cartoon. Has anyone seen the film Who Framed Roger Rabbit? And there's a previous Tex Avery film that this actually comes from, but this is how I used to always describe the situation we were in. Where it's kind of like, here's all the kind of automation and kind of sort of continuous goodness, and then suddenly it stops, and you're kind of, again, you've sort of gone back into the 90s. So what we did here is we didn't want kind of all of our good work building. So this bit here, the Node app with everything sort of through end to end, and that we had complete control over that. We managed the deployments, we did everything. It was all one click go. This bit, not so, because it was sitting on top of this legacy site. So what we did is we made it so that in our playbooks that did the sort of packaging and deployment, we kind of did a sort of kind of quasi-automated or sort of semi-automated solution. So go back to this. Just pull this up as an example. What we do here is we have some boilerplate text for a README that says, here's your release, O masters of the on-prem environment. Please untile these into this directory, into this relationship, this directory. Please have a look in the proxy README and follow the instructions that are in there. And then do this to your Varnish configuration. And that was another Ansible playbook. There was another job saying, basically create this. So we were kind of going as far as we could go. We were putting in we were automating as much as possible, so that at the point where somebody was going to have to work by hand, we were kind of influencing them. And we were sort of saying, well, we know we can't control what you're going to do, but we can influence you. We can help you to kind of do the right thing. Now this all launched, and it was, it worked, and we were getting good numbers back. The site's been refreshed several times since then. There was some good repeat business came off the back of it, but there were some things that went wrong, and there was a particularly sort of unpleasant production defect that happened over the Christmas holiday, and it was really it was a real sort of mea culpa thing for us. We sort of put our hands up and said, no, this was something. Our testing just wasn't good enough on this bit. All the things that worked, you can look back and you say, oh look, fantastic integration test, fantastic unit test, and it all works. This bit, not so. But the way we fixed it, before we could fix it, we needed to actually understand the problem a bit better. And for this, I reached out to, you can't really read this, too small. I reached out to Facebook and got some friends in Facebook. It was a problem to do with sort of finding the location of places. The location finding that we'd done, all our testing in London worked fine, funnily enough. Once you went outside of London, it didn't work so well, and it was a real kind of like, oh yeah, should have done that a bit better. But so I had some friends right up in the Hebrides, and some friends down in Cornwall, and I said, could you just try this? Could you just turn the Wi-Fi off on your phone and just try this, and then go to this site and then see what you get? And they very quickly came back and said, yeah, it's doing this, and we thought, right, thought so. We were then able to kind of disable that bit of the site and say, okay, we'll fix this properly. Because we had all this automation in place, it was click, go, deploy, gone. And the great thing, the response from the client was fantastic. They said, yeah, we'd rather it hadn't happened, but you fixed it before more or less anyone in the company had noticed it was there. So you were set up to a point where, even though there was a problem, you were able to fix it very quickly. The other kind of sort of gratifying thing from this was, and I didn't do an electronic version of this, so you have to squint and look at this here, is we were then able to take this, because the client was so happy with what we'd built here, we were able to take this, reskin it, and turn it into a new version for a different part of their site. And this is the cumulative flow diagram from that. So you can see it's a much shorter project. It still has the S-curve. There's still a bit of kind of, well, the first bit of development takes some time, and then you have a sort of predictable bit of throughput, and we still have a batch deploy or a batch go live, because again, there was a bunch of advertising money that was going to be spent on saying, hey, this new bit of the website's here, and go to this, and it needed to be, Michel Roux style. All the plates needed to be served at once, rather than kind of, here's a bit of meat, I'll give you some potatoes in a minute, and then next week you can have the green beans. And that is all I have to say. So I would like to open this up to questions, and if there's anything here that people would like to ask, I'm very happy to dive into any bit in more detail. Matthew Freak. Matthew and I were at university together 20 years ago. There you are. It was 20 years.
You spoke about the sort of mutually helping DevOps relationship.
Yes.
Did that just fall into place, or was it in places I've worked, I guess there's history there that prevents maybe that mutually helpful relationship just springing up like that to encourage it?
I would put it down mostly to the fact that this guy Grant has just an incredible sense of equanimity. He's just very, very calm and very kind of, he's very much a kind of show don't tell kind of guy. So the fact that with the sort of Ansible Puppet thing, where my initial thought was, well, let's use Puppet because that's what we've got, and kind of, it's a fixed time project, and we'll get it, we'll get there quickly. There's less risk than using something new. When he said, well, no, I think we should use Ansible for this. The way that he sort of convinced me was to come back in the next day and say, oh, here's the stuff that spins up what you want in AWS. So I think it's hard to say. I think a lot of it is down to, he's just got an incredible sort of calmness that really, really, really helps. I'm the opposite. I have a very kind of agitated kind of approach. So it's kind of, I love it when you have people who kind of bring that kind of equanimity to the work. And I think I sort of historically, the last I'd spent, before coming to Friday, I'd spent 2 years working for a startup where we were such a small group of people that we didn't have a separate operations team. So we didn't want to be the ones that would be getting the call in the middle of the night to say, this doesn't work. So I just made sure that everyone in the development team had admin rights to Amazon. and everyone knew that that when something went wrong, it would be the people who'd written the code that would be the ones that would be fixing it.
It's been quite a while since I've worked on something that's such a batteries. In terms of these small changes.
Yeah.
You take any extra steps to put a profile in place for live launch, so you can see your preventing the ability to see profile and actually small changes to figure out where the big buttons show up.
Yeah. So we did. So once we had the stuff once we had enough of the pieces of the sort of puzzle in place to be able to do some end-to-end testing, we did a lot of automated end-to-end testing here, so we could sort of say, and we put sort of time stamping into the logs and things and say,
Like that problem showed the bunch of why. There's probably other.
oh, doubtless, and I think it's kind of, I think there's probably things that we dodged a bullet on. So, but yeah, I think, it's. That's one of the great virtue of continuous delivery and small patch sizes, as everyone knows, is you get the feedback very quickly. So I think if you are going to be dark launched and you're not going to have, if you're not actually going to be able to use the real public, then using friends and family is great. So we had a thing actually. This was a couple of days before the launch. We just threw the URL out to the whole company and said, this is now in its production launch state. Can everyone please have a go on it? And it all worked fine, apart from one guy who was in Madrid, who's a Spanish guy called Juan, who's a UX developer. And he'd gone back to see his family in Madrid, and he says, yeah, this is not working for me from Madrid. And our initial response is, well, it's a UK campaign, kind of, what do you expect? And then we kind of thought, a couple of seconds later, it wouldn't be very good if this went live and some of the kind of great and good of the client company, who may also be on holiday in Europe, decided to have a go of this and said, "Oh, this website doesn't work." So we fixed that issue, and it was all good. So there's ways of doing it. It's not as good. You don't get as much feedback. But I think using a sort of a battery of sort of robot testers, and then either using friends and family or going out to kind of a Mechanical Turk and getting sort of people to sort of engage that way is another way of doing it.
Was there anything more on the measurement visualization side that you've done extra steps on?
I think I would in the future. I have to admit, but as I say, we didn't on this one. Anyone else? You're the back, sir.
Hi. You described at the beginning that you had to do a lot of tooling before you could start making progress on the CFD. So
Yeah.
I might have interpreted this wrong, but I think that means that on your CFD you're not actually showing that tooling, so it's not visible work. Is that right?
So that's a very good point. So this is a CFD that's only showing the value work from. So it's all tracked in Jira. So in Jira, I split work into 3 buckets. I split it into value work, operational overhead, and defects or failure demand. So I've deliberately here taken out all the operational overhead to just show value, because this is the kind of the delivery of value, the outcome for the client is what the project will kind of succeed or fail on. You do start to see development work happening here. So this is where we'd actually turn from. So from here to here is pure tooling, and here is we're actually starting to crank the handle on some features, and they're either kind of telling the tooling, oh, I need this. It's like, oh, well, now I need a role for Nginx, or now I need a role for Postgres or whatever, or it's working on stuff that's kind of able to kind of work with mocks or with kind of a good enough development environment. Yeah, if I were to layer on the operational overhead for this, you'd see development output here, but it's not anything that can actually be used. It doesn't in and of itself provide any value. It is just pure overhead. I'll come back to you, sir, but can I just see if there's anyone else who wants to? Sir.
If you were doing this again, what would you do?
Better instrumentation. No, really, I think it's and I'm very lucky to be doing some work with Skelton Thatcher now. Just started talking to him about a piece of work in my new role, and it's kind of like day one. It's like, right, let us get the instrumentation in place, and let us get that such that it's a first-class citizen, and it's it's as important as the deployment, monitoring, all of that stuff is like, if it's, it's the, if it's not, if you can't measure it, it might as well not be there. I'll come back to you now, sir. Sorry.
Yeah. In terms of team resources, do you have full set devs on hand already?
So the whole team, the team was these guys here. So Andy Pearson, Lorenzo, can't remember his surname, Grant Slater, and me. And then there were a couple of additional front end guys who were working on this kind of reskinning bit along here. But yeah, it was that was the whole team. And then QA came in a bit later. But what we didn't have was we weren't fully resourced with ops. Ops were there more sort of consultancy. Actually, so to Matt, to your point, that was probably what helped this, is that the weighting of the sort of technology team was more it was quite sort of developer heavy, which meant that operations was essentially a more consultative role. So we had to basically go into them and say, please help us out, and help us to help ourselves. So there's there's some benefit in that, and I do very strongly believe in this sort of overlap and kind of allowing each other to influence each other. But I also think you need that core of sort of expertise and competence as well.
Apologies if you've already answered this question, but it's like a two-part question. Firstly,
sneaky.
How visible was the chart you've got there to people in general? I mean, how much was that a thing that people knew to kind of look at and kind of interact with and take value from? The second part is, I suppose, in the absence of like a sort of swanky tool which does it for you, how do you kind of practically go about capturing it and broadcasting it?
So the answer to the first question is not enough. So this would be something that I would present it at stand-ups and sort of say, here's where we're doing, here's what our throughput looks like. I'd use it in discussions with project management around resourcing to say, our throughput is currently 3 features a week. At this rate, we're going to be feature complete by this date. But the ideal for me is it's something that anyone can go and see. You should be radiating it, making it available. In terms of swanky tools, all of this data was in Jira, and we were very kind of religious about keeping that data in Jira. And Jira will create cumulative flow diagrams for you. It's just it doesn't give you as much control over things like coloring, which is important if you want to highlight the difference between states when things are waiting for things to be done, or when things are being done. It doesn't allow you to change the ordering of it. So all this grey stuff at the back was all stuff that passed out of scope. So I don't want that to be at the bottom because it's going to skew the line. And this is all created automatically. There's a bit of open source software that I wrote, which pulls data out of either Jira or Fogbugs and creates this report and a cycle time report and a cycle time histogram and cumulative throughput diagrams and stuff like that. And that was a real kind of scratching an itch thing for me. The main thing I needed to be able to do was say, oh God, there's 20 different ticket types in Jira. Which ones of these are actually of any value or actually delivering value? Which one of these are addressing failure demand and which one of these are operational overhead? And then I can come up with a very clear, it looks like this. It looks like we are introducing, one of my key kind of metrics for a project is at what rate are we introducing defects? And if we can, and the aim is, in sort of John Seddon's words, the aim is to turn off the causes of failure demand. So if you can get to a point where that's zero, you're good. So it's kind of, I use the tooling that I wrote, and it's freely available on my GitHub. I can share it with the audience. Because in my new role I'm using Fogbugs, so I switch it to work with Fogbugs as well. So,
just looking at the graphs, it starts off 2 bars at the beginning, very small.
yes.
Is that the upfront sizing of your backlog at the very beginning? And then that's the slippage through, like I said, in scope, changes, like goes on. Did you upfront the whole backlog?
Yes. So that was the sizing. This was the story map. So what we did was a story mapping exercise to get an idea of scope, we then did the little dots that you probably can't. Oh, look, you see, I didn't put this into presentation mode before it's on. God, sorry. Bear with me. So on here we got as a group we kind of dot voted this and said for each of these give it a complexity score and a sizing score. We then used a very crude heuristic to map from that sizing score to an end-to-end time, a sort of system lead time. We then used as a team figured out what we thought our work in progress would be. What level of work in progress could we as a team support? We then applied Little's law to that. We then mapped that onto an S-curve distribution, and that said, yeah, this project should finish by this point. So that gave us the kind of the scope of it. Within that, some things fell out of scope, some new things came in, some things kind of went out, went in. But yeah, there was the original scope that was really just to release the funds to do the project and say, okay, we don't know exactly what all of these look like. And this is what's going on here is discovery, really. So the product, this is product planning, this is design, this is UX, this is content. This is them all looking at this kind of essentially skeleton and saying, what does a secure login for gym staff really mean? That was one that actually fell out of scope, interestingly enough, because when we showed the user interface to people in the gyms, they said, I don't know what the password for this machine is. And no, literally, and so it was a you've got a trade-off. You can either say this is super secure and no one will ever use it, or you can say, well, the chance it's the fact that it's behind the desk is good enough, and it doesn't have any sort of financial information in it. So that was one. It's quite nice. Quite nice when that disappeared. It's like, great, now we don't have to do an admin. And then a whole lot of other features fell out as well. It's like, I don't administer users anymore. Fantastic. That's good. How are we doing for time, Matthew? Yes. Can I take one more question? Sir, in the orange T-shirt.
Another question. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
You said that the original application launched at that time because there were marketing expense at that time. I was wondering if there was a reason that the extra work that you did in the CFD down the bottom didn't launch more incrementally.
This stuff here?
That's the one that launched on December 29th.
Oh, this one here. Yeah, same reason. Oh, sorry, same reason. It was marketing led.
So is there any reason, any way you felt or could have turned that around so that they could have drip fed some of those features?
Well, so we did in kind of reverse. So you'll notice that there's still some stuff sitting in the QA queue here, and if I hadn't run out of room here, you would see this deliver in a slightly more fluid way. So what we did here was we looked at the cut-off date for the public launch, and we thought there's no way we're going to get reporting finished in time. So for the first 2 weeks of the project, reporting was me, the MySQL client, the Postgres client, and Excel. And I was just kind of literally just going, run a query, put it into Excel, send it round, there you are. Which meant that in the background, we were able to do that reporting stuff, because when the thing launched, there was nothing to report on. So it was the cost of delay on reporting was a lot lower than all the public facing stuff, and that could be, if I go back to the sort of restaurant analogy, that could be the dessert. So after you finished your beautiful Michelin food, you could have a dessert of reporting afterwards. Maybe a cheese course of, I don't know, something else. Does that make sense? Okay.
I'm not sure the restaurant analogy is actually helpful in reality, because I think sometimes there are features that people will want to deliver as soon as possible. You'll always be working on bugs.
The metaphor nearly works. It's not quite right. I want stuff all on my plate to come together, but the group necessarily don't want all of their stuff to arrive here.
Well, it depends. There are some restaurants where it is a big fan of MasterChef, and one of the things in MasterChef is they made a key thing of saying no, everyone's food must arrive at the same time because we don't want stragglers. To just push the restaurant analogy a bit more, what you do want to be delivered continuously, and you want a different class of service to this, is drinks. So you want drinks to arrive you want a continuous flow of drinks. Both the customer and the restaurant wants this. The restaurant wants this because that's where they make most of their money. The customer wants this because they want a drink. So I think you have different
drinks with certain dishes. I don't know.
Yeah, so
I
that
feel
seems
we're
like-
going to different restaurants. I think.
What I'd say is there are different classes of service, and
Yes.
batching occurs. The good reason for batching to occur is because there's a valid business reason for it. The bad reason for batching to occur is because you have high transactional cost, and if your high transactional cost is, as in our example here, there's manual intervention required to deploy. That kind of sucks, but there you are. Anyone else? Thank you very much. Appreciate your time.